Zimbabwe marked Heroes Day on Monday, August 10th, 2026, and Defence Forces Day on Tuesday, August 11th. Every August, familiar words return to the national conversation: liberation, sacrifice, independence, and heroes. But Simon Chimbetu's Hatikanganwe, released on the 1988 album Kuipa Chete, takes us somewhere earlier, before the ceremony, before the monument, and before anybody knew how the war would end. Many Zimbabweans know the song as Hatikanganwe, but recognize it almost instinctively through one phrase: Vakashinga, Moyo, the brave-hearted. What did courage mean when leaving home could mean never coming back? By the end of this review, you will understand what Hatikanganwe preserves about the generation that crossed borders to fight, why that memory remained so close inside Zimbabwean families, what Simon Chimbetu contributed as a carrier of liberation, memory, and why this song has endured for almost 4 decades. This is the Kopje Journal and Review Arts Desk. The Kopje Journal and Review Arts Desk examines the books, history, music, film, culture, biography, and memory of Southern Africa. In this cultural memory song review, we are listening to Hatikanganwe not simply as an old recording, but as evidence of how Zimbabweans remembered departure, sacrifice, and the people who went away to war. Subscribe to the Kopje Journal and Review Arts Desk for more reviews that use Southern African music, books, biography, and cultural memory to understand the societies that produced them. To understand Hatikanganwe, forget for a moment that Zimbabwe became independent in 1980. Go back to the 1960s and 1970s when there was no independent Zimbabwean flag, no hero's acre, and no certainty that Rhodesia would fall. Instead, begin with a household. A young man leaves a rural village. Another disappears from a township. Someone travels east toward Mozambique. Someone else moves north, crosses the Zambezi and enters Zambia and the wider frontline world. Behind them are parents, wives, brothers, sisters, and children who may know very little about what happens next. Sometimes a message arrives, sometimes somebody hears that a relative is training somewhere across the border. Sometimes the family hears nothing. Today we call those people liberation fighters because we know what happened afterward. They did not. They did not know how long the war would continue, whether Rhodesia would survive, whether independence would arrive in their lifetime, or whether they would live long enough to come home. That is what gives Vakashinga Moyo its weight. The bravery comes before the result, and this is why Hatikanganwe could feel intensely personal across Zimbabwe. The liberation. War did not live only in political speeches or history books. It lived inside families. For one household, it was a father who had gone to Mozambique. For another, an uncle who crossed into Zambia. For somebody else, a brother who came home after independence and rarely talked about what had happened. There were neighbours who returned, relatives whose wartime stories became part of family memory, and people who never returned at all. So when Simon Chimbetu sings about those who went, the listener does not necessarily hear anonymous people from a distant national story. They may hear somebody they knew. National history becomes family history. A textbook can tell you that Zimbabweans crossed borders during the Liberation War. A family can tell you who left. A song can make those two memories meet. Musically, Hatikanganwe also refuses to become a funeral procession. The bass moves, the rhythm carries the listener forward. Dendera makes memory mobile. People can dance while remembering something enormously serious. The Kopje Journal and Review views this as one of Chimbetu's greatest contributions. He did not lock history inside a museum. A monument waits for people to visit it, but a song travels with the people. It travels through a radio, a bus, a beer hall, a family gathering, or an ordinary Saturday afternoon. That helps explain why Hatikanganwe survived. It also explains why, Simon Chimbetu matters beyond this one recording. Chimbetu belonged to a generation directly shaped by the liberation struggle. After independence came military service, the Marxist brothers, orchestra Dendera kings. And the development of a sound that became unmistakably Zimbabwean. But this is not a full Simon Chimbetu profile. What matters here is the way he repeatedly treated liberation memory as living material. He sang of people leaving, people fighting, people remembering, people returning, and the people who never returned at all. That makes him more than the performer of Hatikanganwe. In songs like this, he becomes a carrier of memory, and behind that memory was also a dream. The people who crossed into Mozambique, Zambia, and elsewhere were not simply traveling toward war. They were traveling toward an imagined future. Different fighters undoubtedly imagined that future differently, but independence carried expectations of majority rule, political dignity, land, opportunity, security, and the ability to return home to a country governed differently from Rhodesia, whether independent. Zimbabwe ultimately fulfilled all of those expectations is a much larger audit. Hatikanganwe asks us to preserve the historical order. First came the dream, then came the sacrifice, and only later came the country they actually inherited. Official. Commemorations happen on particular dates. Songs do not obey the calendar. Someone can hear Hatikanganwe in February, June, or November, and suddenly remember a father, an uncle, an aunt, a brother, a neighbour, or somebody from the community whose life passed through the Liberation War. Thank you for watching. Now you can see why this memory is not small, and what Hatikanganwe reveals about the families who sent people away, the people who crossed the borders, and those who remained behind, waiting for them. The Kopje Journal and Review's reading is that Hatikanganwe survives because Simon Chimbetu converted a massive national war into something small enough to fit inside a single household. He remembers the liberation struggle before history had decided who the heroes would be, when people crossed borders carrying little certainty beyond the belief that another Zimbabwe might be possible, Vakashinga, Moyo. They had to be brave-hearted first. Only afterward could history call them heroes. When you hear Hatikanganwe, who does it make you remember? Was there somebody in your family or community who left for the Liberation War? Tell us their story in the comments. We read all comments. If this review gave you a different way of hearing Hatikanganwe, like the video, and share it with somebody who remembers Simon Chimbetu's music. This is the Kopje Journal and Review Arts Desk. The Kopje Journal and Review Arts Desk examines the books, history, music, film, culture, biography, and memory of Southern Africa. Subscribe to the Kopje Journal and Review Arts Desk for more Southern African song reviews, cultural memory audits, biographies and histories that ask not only what survived but why people still remember it.